Welcome back to the Sports Medicine Orthopedic Show.
That intro to that song didn't do justice to the, like, I thought 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was just going to come in blasting, and it was this weak Casio keyboard.
Sports Medicine Orthopedic Show. Our phone number, 877-698-3627. I'm Dr. Dennis Cardone, joined by my co-host, Lomas, Dr. Guillaume Lomas, and we're talking sports medicine and orthopedics. Joining us, Dr. David Spierer, and we're talking about swearing and stamina. What's the connection? And Dr. Spierer, co-founder of the telefitness website, wellnessroundtable.com, formerly an associate professor of exercise science at Long Island University in Brooklyn, co-author of new research that showed swearing during exercise may help improve physical strength. Dr. Spierer, morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great to have you up early in the morning, and thanks for joining us. So,
or should we refer to you as Dr. David effing Spierer?
Yeah, that'd be great. I could get a jersey with that name on it. I think that would look great.
This is some pretty interesting stuff. So, new research showing that swearing during exercise may help improve physical strength. So, tell us about that. Tell us about the research.
Sure. So this is research that I did with a colleague who is out of the UK at Keele University, and a few years ago we got to the idea of collaborating on some of the research that he had started. So he had done some research on swearing and pain tolerance, and we figured, it's looking at swearing and pain tolerance. We see that when individuals swear in a kind of structured format. I'll kind of explain that in a moment. It seems that they're distracted from pain. He used in particular what's called a cold pressor test, which is where you stick your hand in cold water, and found that individuals who are swearing versus saying the word that's considered neutral are able to hold their hand in the water for a longer period of time. So we wanted to look at physical activity and swearing to see if swearing had any effect on performance. And basically we did 2 experiments across the pond from one another. So we were in isolated labs, but our methods were basically the same. I looked at 29 individuals. He looked at 52 individuals. I did a test that was a 30-second bite test. It's known as the Wingate test, which is a very exertional test. It requires somebody to pedal against very heavy resistance for 30 seconds. And he did a grip strength test, which looks at, it's really an indication of upper body strength. And that's how an individual can maximally grip a device for a period of time. And we had our subjects curse, and then we had the same subjects use what was called a neutral word. In my case, it was describing a table. So people would say round or flat. And in the curse word, we basically said to an individual, what would you say if you hit yourself in the thumb with a hammer? What would you say if you suddenly banged your head into the top of a cabinet? Most of the time the word was F. I would say 70 to 80%.
And was that cross-cultural? Was that in the UK as well?
It was.
Yes. And were you in Brooklyn or were you in Arizona with these subjects?
I was in Brooklyn. So yeah, and just to kind of address that for a moment, some of the words were kind of combination words, like mother F was one of them. But what I want to point out is that we did not have our participants kind of just curse off the top of their head. They weren't able to, or they weren't allowed to, or instructed to yell the curse or just go off. It was done in a very structured way. It was almost done in kind of a mantra. So in my experiment, which was 30 seconds, participants cursed every 3 seconds. They cursed 10 times throughout the test, and they did it in a way that was kind of structured, it was loud, it was clear, but they weren't necessarily yelling. And I think that plays a big part in our findings.
So this is interesting. We were talking just at the top of the show how there has been research done on the effects of noise making during exercise. I've read articles about how grunting seems to have some sort of disinhibitory effect. and allows people to lift a little bit more. So what do you think is going on here? Because this isn't just grunting. I mean, there's a higher process at work in the brain. Coming up with the word, and then having to say it while you're exercising, while you're doing resistance.
So when we first set out to do this study, we hypothesized that this was going to be a flight or fight issue. It was going to be an issue of cursing brings about flight or fight, and that's a physiologic effect that we have when we're threatened, and that's what's going to drive this. That was not the case. We measured flight or fight, so we did not see any change in both experiments of flight or fight. One of the reasons is because the test that I did was extremely exertional, and heart rates and blood pressure rose regardless. So it kind of would mask any kind of flight or fight response that we might see. Same thing happened in the grip test. What we happen to think is going on is that there is, as you mentioned, a disinhibition, meaning as an individual curses, they become less inhibited about what it is they're saying and what it is they're expressing. And we seem to think that when you're talking about higher processes in the brain, the amygdala is probably responsible for this, an area of the left hemisphere that is related to emotion. It's also related to memory. We didn't measure the brain in any way. We didn't do any kind of MRI, but that might be the next step in future research. And I will tell you that from a kind of a firsthand standpoint, when individuals walked into our lab and we sort of we instructed them and we got them familiar with the bike and everything, we did all the things that you would do to kind of control an experiment. They would say to me, "I can't believe I'm in here and I'm going to be saying the F word in front of you. Like, this just doesn't, it doesn't compute. It's really weird." As soon as they started that bike test and as soon as it started to become difficult, it went out the window. It didn't matter. They were cursing.
They wanted more than every 3 seconds.
But maybe, was there
a
a cultural difference? I mean, did it matter if it's somebody, and we laugh about Brooklyn, right, where these curse words are just more conversational compared to someone who maybe never uses the word, and then all of a sudden they're using it during exercise, maybe even having more impact.
I'll tell you that the word that was most used was the F word. There were some people who just would not say the F word. And there were some international students who did not feel comfortable saying the F word. So I think in that case there was. We didn't have anyone who, one thing is we didn't necessarily measure or we didn't look at the differences in culture versus, the word that they use versus their improvement in performance. So that was not something we examined. But it didn't seem, regardless of the culture, it didn't matter that these individuals were cursing. Yes, the word they selected might have been different, but they were still cursing with the same vehemence and the same kind of expression. It didn't matter what culture they were from.
We're talking with Dr. David Spierer, and Dr. Spierer, co-author of new research that showed swearing during exercise may help improve physical strength. If you've had experience with swearing, if you use it in your exercise program and it's been positive, if you've ever sworn, if you ever swear, give us a call. Give us your experience. 877-698-3627, 877-NYU-DOCS.
Yeah, David, I mean, I see an incredible marketing opportunity here for, to have your own line of gyms that, cater to specifically swears. So one thing that I'm interested in is, every culture has their sort of their swear words, and then they have the kind of sanitized version, right? Like for the F word, it'll be fudge, or what. And I'm curious if that, because like when you say that word, you are thinking F word, and you're just tweaking it a little bit, to make it okay to say in public.
That's right.
And I wonder, if instead of table or whatever, round or desk or a random word, if that word ends up being, that fudge type of word ends up being somewhere in between, or it's closer to the real swear word, or it's indifferent. It's just as if you said table.
I think that's a really good question. That's not something that we specifically looked at, but I will say this, that what we got from individuals was, or participants, was that when they were saying the word and they knew, again, every 3 seconds, they were repeating that word, as they sort of, in their head, they were thinking, I'm going to be saying this word again. I'm going to be saying this word again. I'm going to be cursing again. That sort of distracted them from the task at hand. It distracted them from what it was they were doing, from how difficult the activity was, from the pain they might have been feeling in their legs as they were doing the bike test. Using the word fudge might have a similar effect. I just don't think it would have driven people as much as when they actually said the F word. Because when they were expressing themselves by saying the F word, they knew it was taboo. There was something taboo about it that would not have been the same with the word fudge. And that's kind of my thinking. And we could definitely repeat the experiment and do words that would be similar sounding, but not necessarily a curse word, and see what happens. I mean, I think it's a good question.
And did you did you tell them they need to yell the word out? I mean, just be vocal, almost like a heavy grunt, right? I mean, did they have to yell it, or they could softly speak the word?
No, they could not softly speak the word. They had to say it loud and clear, but they couldn't scream it. It wasn't about that. It was about much more of a controlled expression. But yes, they had to say it loud and they had to say it clear.
What was the most unusual word that somebody picked as their swear word?
Mother effer.
Just because it's long.
Yeah.
Like that takes almost 3 seconds to say.
Well, you could say
so they're just talking the whole time.
True. That's right.
They're not breathing
the entire time. Yeah. By the way, I have to tell you that my lab was next to the dean's office, and it was really strange doing this study.
Well, you said this was in Brooklyn. Probably no one noticed anything.
They just thought that your experiment wasn't going well. They're frustrated next to
do well on a test, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
How about gender? Did that play a difference?
It did not. No, we didn't see a change in gender, and I had 18 females in the group of 29 people who I studied. So we had a nice split, and that didn't make a difference.
So what would you say? How could people use this in their exercise program? Right? How can they be appropriate and maybe get benefit? Do they really need to use a curse word, or is there some other word maybe that they don't use often in their vocabulary, or something else that could be motivating?
Well, I think to answer that, I think that using a word that is maybe unique to them might have the same effect because it does provide that distraction. I would say that from this research, I would say use a curse word first, see if it has any kind of effect, if it improves performance in any way. The type of exercise I think this would be best for would be anything that would be considered anaerobic, like a short burst of energy that's required. Some of my early research was done in ice hockey players, and ice hockey players curse all the time. While skating for a puck, while trying to accelerate quickly, if using a mantra like this, or using a mantra like this might help in terms of, again, distracting yourself from what it is that you're doing. A cyclist might benefit from this. A runner might benefit from this. And in other interviews, I've mentioned trying to open up a jar of pickles that's difficult to open. Now, I'm not going to go out here and say that you'll be able to open up the jar. But what I will say is that as you're doing this, you might be distracted from how difficult it is to open up the jar and surprise yourself by being able to open it.
So maybe like in the weight room, let's say someone is, trying to do that one last rep. Just say, and you would recommend just saying it once, or saying it as you're lifting, like, if take just a classic exercise, bench press, would you say like F, 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 or just one fudge?
No, I would say repeat it. It's got to be done in kind of a mantra-like fashion. That's the whole trick to this. And I wouldn't just say it just one after the other. I would do it like F, 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 like continuously repeat it at kind of a regular interval, and then see what happens.
Well, I'll let you know when my gym membership at Equinox gets rescinded. I'll let you know how long that takes.
Probably one session, you're out of there.
People being kicked out of gyms all over the country.
Let's take a phone call. Let's go to Joanne in New York.
Sure.
Hi, Joanne. You're on the air.
Hi, doctors. I really enjoy your radio show every morning. My experience has not been in the gym, but it has been in having cortisone shots in my hands, in the joints of my fingers. And the first time I had the injection into my nerves, I must have screamed, God, 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 and it helped a little bit. But the second and third time, the only way I could get through that pain was using the F word, and I'm saying every second. It felt like that was the only way I could distract myself from that electrifying feeling, and it does help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's interesting because I'll just add that when I do injections, it's very interesting to see people's response. And you're absolutely right, Joanne. I have people who curse, I have people who whistle, people who sing, people who cry, laugh, or just go into another zone completely. You know, say, okay, don't talk to me. I want to go into another zone before you do the injection. So, interesting. David?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we measured is perceived exertion. Like, how difficult did you think this test was? And we did that, we measured that after the individuals cursed during the bike test and after they said that neutral word to describe a table. And we found there was no difference. So it kind of supports what you're saying, that if you say that word, and if that word is sort of taboo to you, you're going through a painful experience, it really is distracting, and your perceived exertion, or in this case, your perceived pain, is reduced. So we definitely saw something very similar to that.
And of course, it clears the waiting room as well. It's not so good for the doctor. Joanne,
Right.
thanks for your call, Joanne.
So David, what's the next step here? I mean, I feel like there really are myriad directions you could take this research into.
Yeah, there are. I think one of the things that we want to start looking at is, number one, what other types of activities are affected by this? So is it only kind of anaerobic activity, or could it be other things that relate to coordination or balance? Maybe things that aren't as exertional. And then the other part that I would be very interested in starting to look at is areas of the brain that are really that fire when actually doing this type of thing during different kinds of activity. Possibly using functional MRI or just using MRI and trying to determine what's really going on in the brain. And also we could do other things that I think are a little bit more simplistic, where we use other types of words, like you said, words that sound like the F word but aren't the F word, and then see what types of results we get. And the other, you mentioned something about, a line of gyms, but the fact is that there may be an opportunity for something a little bit more specific in terms of exercise that we do, where we are encouraging individuals to curse. And the thing is, look, to certain cultures, cursing is taboo. It's an expletive. It's not something that, you're not going to do it in the workplace all the time. But the fact is, people curse. They curse. They live their lives, throughout the day they curse. I'm a person who curses. I don't curse at my children when I'm taking them to school, unless they forget their lunch and I have to go back a half an hour to get that. But other than that, people do this in their everyday life. So I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that individuals could start using this kind of, this kind of language in a way, this kind of expression to help them.
Well, no, and it is interesting. Yeah, the reasons that we curse, right? There's probably something tied into that. Why that comes about at certain moments, right. And it's probably not that unrelated. And real quick, obviously, very difficult to unpack this in just a minute, but the first thing you think about when you hear someone kind of cursing repetitively is Tourette's syndrome. Do you think there is a connection between the two?
It's interesting you say that because doing some reading on some research, to do this study, Tourette's and also aphasia after stroke, individuals tend to curse, and they use a different part of their brain than you do for actual language, like Wernicke's or Broca's area in the brain. I think that there may be a connection. I don't, if you're asking me if in Tourette's there's pain that individuals are suffering from and they're cursing to sort of distract themselves from it, I don't think that's necessarily the case. But I do think that there is this kind of desire to say something that is that's kind of out of the ordinary in those kinds of disorders, and they just come out. They just say it. There's no sort of thought behind it. It's not like you're saying, I'm going to curse. It just comes out. It's a word that you happen to say. So I do think there may be a connection there. But in our case, of course, the cursing was structured. It was thought about. It was something we had talked about. We instructed on it. So, I think in that case, our study is a lot different than those disorders.
The next piece would be to look at people with Tourette's to see if they're better athletes. I mean, maybe.
That's right. That's right.
We've been talking with Dr. David Spierer, co-founder of the telefitness website wellnessroundtable.com, formerly an associate professor of exercise science at LIU in Brooklyn, and co-author of new research that showed swearing during exercise may help improve physical strength. Thanks so much for joining us.